Let's be real for a second. You're tired. Tired of feeling invisible to someone who once made your heart race. You've replayed every message, every glance, every moment, wondering what went wrong, and worse, wondering how they moved on so easily while you're still stuck in rewind. You've been conditioned to believe that if you're kind enough, patient enough, consistent enough, they'll eventually see your worth. That they'll wake up one day in a storm of nostalgia and realize, damn, I miss them. But what if that's the lie that's been keeping you stuck? What if constantly proving your worth is the very thing making you forgettable? Let's break this down. Society has sold you this idea. If they don't want you, try harder. Be more available. Be more emotional. Be more understanding. But here's the truth, the uncomfortable, life-changing truth. People don't miss what's constantly available. They don't chase what's always in reach. The more you offer yourself without boundaries, the easier it is for them to treat you like background noise. That's not your failure. That's psychology. And that's exactly why it's time to shift your energy, not toward chasing their attention, but toward becoming unforgettable. Yes, even if they're not interested. Especially then. Because there's a method, a blueprint, that isn't about manipulation or playing hard to get. It's about emotional control, self-respect, silence as strategy, presence as power. It's about mastering what I call Stoic relationships, where you no longer move based on someone's interest level. You move based on your mission. This isn't about games, it's about growth. It's about turning their indifference into discomfort, not out of spite, but because you've stopped watering a connection that never gave anything back. And guess what? That's when everything changes. That's when they feel your absence like a void they can't fill. Not because you vanished with bitterness, but because you evolved with discipline. So here's my promise to you. In this video, we're going to flip the script. You're not going to beg to be remembered. You're going to learn how to disappear in a way that echoes. I'll guide you step by step, through real Stoic psychology, on how to create silence that speaks louder than your presence ever could. We'll cover exactly why they ignore you now, and how to become the one they can't stop thinking about later. We're diving deep. This isn't surface-level stuff. This is the emotional switch that changes your story. And by the end of this, you won't be chasing anymore, you'll be rising. So stay locked in. Because what comes next isn't just advice, it's strategy. And when you understand it fully, you won't just make them miss you. You'll become the kind of person they can't replace, even if they never admit it. Let's get started. 1. Stop trying to be missed, detach with dignity. Let's begin with a hard truth. People don't miss you because you keep showing up. They miss you when you stop. When you go silent, not out of spite or drama, but out of peace. When the energy they once took for granted disappears, not with noise, but with clarity. And yet, this is the very place most people get stuck. They think that trying harder will eventually flip the emotional switch. That if you just love them enough, stay loyal enough, and keep reminding them you're still there, one day they'll wake up and finally feel what you've felt all along. But that's not how the mind works. That's not how human nature works. Especially not when interest has already faded. Here's something you need to ask yourself. What are you really chasing when you keep reaching out to someone who gives you nothing back? Is it love, or is it validation? Are you trying to connect with them, or are you just trying to feel worthy through their attention? Because when we dig into it, often it's not about them at all. It's about our need to feel seen by the one who refuses to see us. That's not connection, that's compulsion. And that cycle is where self-worth goes to die. The Stoic response? Stop trying. Not to be passive. Not to give up. But to remember your dignity. To remember that detachment is not about being cold, it's about being clear. When someone shows you indifference, your job isn't to warm them up. It's to exit with grace. And yet the modern world screams the opposite. Social media makes you believe that silence equals failure. That disappearing means you've lost. That if you're not visible, you're irrelevant. But here's the paradox. In Stoic relationships, the less noise you make, the more powerful your presence becomes. Why is that? Because silence introduces contrast. And contrast is what makes the mind pay attention. We ignore the things that are always there. A buzzing fan in a room becomes invisible after a while. But the moment it stops, suddenly the silence becomes deafening. You look up. You wonder what changed. And in that moment, the absence becomes louder than the presence ever was. That's exactly how detachment with dignity works. You don't beg to be remembered. You stop showing up, and you let the absence speak for itself. Still, some of you might be thinking, but won't they forget me completely if I stop trying? And that's the fear, isn't it? That your silence will be mistaken for disinterest, that they'll walk away for good, that they'll never think of you again. But I want you to consider something else. What if the reason they haven't valued you is because you've always been there? What if your constant effort has made you forgettable, not memorable? What if being easy to reach has made you easy to ignore? The truth is, they won't forget you because you disappeared. They'll forget you if you keep showing up in the same way. Predictability is emotional anesthesia. The more someone knows exactly how you'll respond, the easier it is for them to stop caring. That's not rejection. That's human behavior. We crave novelty, uncertainty, challenge. Not drama, but mystery. And when someone always knows what you'll say, what you'll feel, what you'll do, there's no mystery left. No tension. No intrigue. That's not love. That's routine. And routines don't get missed, they get replaced. Now here's where things get sharper. Imagine you're pouring water into a glass with no bottom. You keep giving. You keep hoping. You think, maybe this time, they'll finally see it. But the glass never fills. Your efforts fall through. And every time you pour more in, you're not building connection, you're draining yourself. Meanwhile, they watch. Unbothered. Comfortable. Because here's the brutal irony. The person who gives the most often holds the least power. Not because kindness is weakness, but because overgiving in the face of indifference creates imbalance. And imbalance is the death of desire. So what's the alternative? You stop pouring. Not to punish, but to preserve. Not to manipulate, but to shift the dynamic back to reality. You stop knocking on a door that was never opened in the first place. That's stoicism in action. You hold your emotions like water in your own hands. You stop trying to spill them into someone else's world and instead, you drink them yourself. You nourish your own peace. And you begin to realize something. Their absence doesn't define your worth. Your silence doesn't mean you've lost. It means you've remembered who you are. This is not easy. Let's not pretend it is. You will feel the pull to check your phone. You will crave that one text. That one, hey, that might mean they're thinking of you. But this is the detox. This is the withdrawal. You are breaking the habit of attention seeking, and that's a form of emotional rebirth. You are killing off the version of you who kept hoping they'd see your worth while making no effort to show they cared. And in that space, yes, in that painful silence, you will meet the new version of yourself. The one who doesn't beg for affection. The one who doesn't perform to be missed. The one who doesn't crumble when someone walks away. That version of you? That version is unforgettable. Ask yourself, how many times have you reached out just to feel acknowledged? How many times have you shared something hoping they'd respond, only to be met with silence? And how much longer do you want to feel powerless in that dynamic? Because there comes a moment, if you're honest with yourself, when you realize this isn't about getting them back. It's about getting yourself back. It's about reclaiming the energy you kept giving away for free. And the second you do that, everything begins to shift. Suddenly they notice. Not because you said something, but because you didn't. They scroll through their feed and your name isn't there. They post a story and you don't react. They send a test text and you don't bite. And it's not because you're trying to play games. It's because you're no longer available in the way you used to be. That shift in energy? It's felt. Deeply. And whether they say it or not, whether they reach out or not, something inside them clicks. Where did they go? That question begins to echo. Not in words. In silence. And let me be very clear, this is not about being cruel. Stoicism is not about ice. It's about inner fire, controlled. It's about emotional clarity. You're not shutting down. You're waking up. You're choosing not to offer your vulnerability to someone who hasn't earned it. And when you walk away, not to provoke, but to preserve, that's when the emotional weight of your absence begins to grow. That's when the silence becomes a storm they didn't prepare for. So here's the question you need to sit with: what if they never come back? What if your silence doesn't pull them in? And the answer is simple, powerful, liberating. Then they were never meant to be in your life to begin with. That realization isn't a loss. It's a filter. A gift. It shows you who was only interested in your availability, not your soul. And once you stop seeking to be missed, once you stop needing to be remembered, you become something even more powerful, unshakable. This is the beginning of the shift. You are no longer reacting to their silence. You are responding with your own. Not to make them feel what you felt, but to feel what you haven't felt in a long time: peace. You are not the one begging anymore. You are not the one proving anymore. You are not the one waiting anymore. You are the one walking forward. Not with noise, not with fire, but with stillness. And that stillness? That's your power. That's Stoic relationships. That's how they begin to miss you, not because you vanished with chaos, but because you disappeared with calm. And in that calm, they begin to feel something they didn't expect: regret. Stay with me. Because the next step is where the silence becomes a strategy, and your absence begins to echo. 2. Make your absence feel intentional. It's one thing to go silent. It's another to go silent with purpose. If you disappear without clarity, it's just noise without sound. But when you vanish with intention, your absence becomes unforgettable. Most people go quiet hoping the other person will come running. They block them, they hide their stories, they delete photos. But the energy underneath all of that is still desperate. Still seeking validation. Still waiting for a response. That kind of silence doesn't make someone miss you. It just makes you invisible. The truth? Silence without strength is nothing but avoidance. But silence with presence, that's power. So ask yourself, what energy are you carrying underneath your silence? Is it calm, or is it chaos? Are you retreating to heal, or are you retreating to be noticed? Because the energy doesn't lie. You can block someone and still be emotionally attached. You can stop texting and still be hoping. And they'll feel it. People might not say much, but they can feel everything. If your silence is just a performance, they'll smell the fear behind it. But if your silence is grounded, firm, intentional, suddenly, they don't know what hit them. You have to understand how rare that kind of silence is. Most people leave a trail of emotional breadcrumbs behind them. They disappear but still check stories. They delete messages but still stalk quietly. They pretend to move on but still post quotes to be seen. That's not absence. That's bait. And guess what? It doesn't work. Not on someone who already stopped caring. It only reinforces the imbalance. It tells them you're still orbiting them emotionally, still hoping they'll come back. And the moment they sense that, the game's already lost. But there's a different path. A colder path. A cleaner one. One that doesn't rely on attention-seeking but on self-control. You vanish, but not out of anger. You go quiet, but not to manipulate. You simply stop showing up because your energy is no longer available to someone who didn't value it. And you do it without warning, without explanation, without drama. Why? Because people don't fear what they expect. They fear what they can't explain. They fear what disappears without a trace. That's the silence that haunts them. That's what makes absence echo. Picture this. There was once a lighthouse, steady, predictable, always shining. It guided every ship through the storm. Then, one night, without announcement, the light didn't come on. The ocean didn't know where to go. The sailors were lost. The silence wasn't loud. It was chilling. That's what your silence needs to feel like. Not reactive. Intentional. And once it does, the emotional landscape changes. You become the mystery. You become the question mark. And people don't forget questions they can't answer. Here's something no one tells you: the mind doesn't replay clarity. It replays confusion. If you give them closure, they move on. If you beg for attention, they grow bored. But if you walk away quietly, if you close the door without saying a word, that's what keeps them up at night. Because now, their mind is working overtime. Why did they stop reaching out? Did they meet someone else? Are they really over me? Those thoughts don't come from love, they come from ego. But they still come. And the more you remain still, the more that internal storm grows. But you have to hold the line. This is where most people slip. They break their silence when they don't feel noticed. They post something just to provoke a reaction. They check in, just once, hoping for a sign. But every time you do that, you kill the power of your absence. You reset the cycle. And they learn they still have emotional access to you. That you're still watching. Still waiting. Still hoping. That's not strategy. That's sabotage. And it only delays the transformation you need. You need to become emotionally unavailable, not out of bitterness, but out of discipline. Think of your attention as currency. Would you keep spending it on someone who hasn't paid you in return? Would you keep handing over your energy to someone who hasn't earned the right to feel it? Of course not. But that's exactly what you do when you break your silence for someone who treated you like an option. Your energy is sacred. Stop giving it away for free. And make no mistake, your silence will be tested. Maybe not immediately. Maybe not loudly. But one day, they'll send a message. Or they'll view your story. Or they'll like an old post. Something small. Just enough to see if you'll react. That's not love. That's ego fishing for proof that they still matter. Don't bite. Let the silence stretch. Let it do its job. Because every day that passes without your attention is a day their illusion of control cracks. And they'll never admit it. They'll act unfazed. But behind the mask, they're wondering. This is the power of intentional absence. It's not about removing yourself for attention. It's about removing yourself because your peace matters more than their indifference. And once you truly believe that, everything starts to shift. You sleep better. You breathe deeper. Your mind stops looping the same thoughts. And without even realizing it, you start evolving. Not for them. For you. You start glowing, not to provoke, but because the shadow they once cast over your life is gone. So let me ask you, what would your life look like if you stopped waiting for them to miss you? What would it feel like to stop reacting, stop hoping, and just be? What would it mean to walk in silence with confidence, knowing that you no longer need to be seen to be remembered? That's the core of Stoicism. You detach not because you've given up, but because you've grown up. You don't perform pain. You embody peace. And when that happens, the silence becomes louder than your presence ever was. Let's not romanticize this. It's not easy. It's not smooth. There will be moments of doubt. Nights where the temptation to reach out burns through your chest. Mornings where you wake up and instinctively want to check their page. That's human. But don't confuse weakness with failure. You're unlearning habits. You're retraining your nervous system. And every time you choose silence over impulse, you're reinforcing a new identity, one that is rooted in stoicism, resilience, and clarity. Eventually, they'll feel it. Maybe they won't say anything. Maybe they'll never admit it. But they'll feel the shift. And they'll remember you, not as the one who begged, not as the one who tried too hard, but as the one who vanished with dignity. The one who didn't need closure. The one who didn't fight for a second chance. The one who let go without noise. And that memory? That's the one that stays. So if this message speaks to something deep in you, if you're ready to stop chasing and start evolving, then do something bold right now. Like this video and comment, number 1, if you're ready to reclaim your power. Let me know you're with me. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button. Because we're just getting started, and what comes next will change everything. 3. Become unpredictable. Break the emotional pattern. Predictability is emotional death. When someone knows exactly how you'll feel, how you'll react, when you'll check in, they stop paying attention. Not because you're not good enough, but because you've become routine. And routines don't trigger memory. They trigger comfort, and comfort is forgettable. But confusion is what haunts the mind. So ask yourself, have you become too easy to understand? Too emotionally available? Too transparent in your intentions? Here's the paradox. Most of us want to be understood. We think clarity equals connection. So we explain. We share. We give our hearts like open books, hoping the other person will read every page with care. But when someone isn't interested, your transparency doesn't invite love. It invites control. It makes you emotionally predictable. And the moment they know what you'll do next, they stop wondering. They stop investing. They stop feeling anything at all. That's not love, it's autopilot. Now, this doesn't mean you should become cold or manipulative. That's not Stoicism. Stoicism isn't about suppressing emotions. It's about mastering your emotional responses. So what does that look like in practice? It looks like disrupting the pattern, breaking the loop, choosing not to respond the way they expect. If they ghost you and expect a follow-up message, don't send it. If they post a story fishing for your attention, don't bite. If they trigger you emotionally, don't give them the satisfaction of your reaction. That's not pettiness. That's power. Think of it this way. The brain is wired to complete patterns. It finds safety in what it can predict. That's why unresolved stories stick with us. That's why cliffhangers in movies keep us up at night. Because the mind hates unfinished business. Now, apply that to your situation. If they know exactly what you'll say, how you'll feel, what you'll do when they go silent, then there's no story to chase. No curiosity. No friction. But when you change the script, everything changes. Let's go deeper. Imagine your dynamic with them is like a song they've heard 1,000 times. Same beat. Same lyrics. Same predictable chorus. At first, they might enjoy it. But over time, it becomes background noise. Now imagine that same song ends mid-verse, just cuts out unexpectedly. No warning. No fade out. Just silence. What do? They play it again. They rewind it. They wonder what went wrong. Not because they love the song, but because the pattern was broken. That's how unpredictability works. It interrupts the emotional certainty they've built around you. But this shift isn't just about making them curious. It's about reclaiming your inner space. When you stop responding based on how you think they'll feel, and start acting from a place of self-respect, your energy changes. You stop orbiting them emotionally. You become the sun, not the satellite. You radiate from within. And in doing so, you become unreadable. Not because you're hiding, but because you're no longer available to be emotionally decoded by someone who misread you in the first place. This is especially important in Stoic relationships. Because Stoicism isn't about silence alone, it's about unpredictability rooted in discipline. You no longer act out of fear of being forgotten. You act out of trust in your own evolution. And here's where the magic happens. When someone can't read you, they can't dismiss you. They can't file you away emotionally. They can't put you in a category. You're no longer the needy ex, or the clingy one, or the always available friend. You're something else now. Something they can't explain. And what we can't explain, we replay. So how do you become unpredictable without losing your authenticity? You shift your focus inward. Instead of thinking, how will they feel if I do this? You ask, is this aligned with who I'm becoming? You stop chasing emotional outcomes and start embodying emotional boundaries. You stop reacting and start reflecting. When they say something triggering, you don't respond with emotion, you observe. When they expect a reply, you offer silence. Not to hurt them, but to protect yourself. Here's the beauty of it, Unpredictability doesn't mean inconsistency. It means emotional independence. You're not being erratic, you're being grounded. You're no longer on their schedule. You're on your own. And when you stop playing by their emotional rules, they feel it. Deeply. Because now, their ego is confused. Their sense of control is shaken. And they start to ask questions they never had to ask before. Why didn't they text back? Why didn't they view my story? Why do they seem so unaffected? And those questions? They're emotional landmines. Not because you said anything, but because your silence said everything. And this unpredictability, this unreadability, it's not about punishing them. It's about protecting your spirit. You no longer give emotional access to someone who treated your heart like an afterthought. You no longer offer predictability to someone who never valued your consistency. And when you do that, the dynamic flips. You're not the one chasing anymore. You're the one being studied, analyzed, recalled. That's not revenge. That's restoration. Let me offer you something raw, the version of you that always responded, always cared, always showed up. That version was beautiful, but it was also predictable. And predictable versions of us are the ones most often taken for granted. But the version that chooses peace over reaction? The one who glows in silence? That version becomes unforgettable. Not because of drama, but because of discipline. You're not disappearing to be missed. You're becoming unreadable to be remembered. Because unreadability forces reflection. It forces the other person to sit with their own assumptions, their own decisions, their own patterns. They no longer have access to your emotional script. And that's what makes the silence deafening. Not just for them, but for their ego. And don't be surprised if they try to provoke a response. If they suddenly become curious. If they send vague messages or try to bait you back into the old dance. That's not affection. That's confusion wrapped in ego. And it's your job to stay grounded. You don't react. You don't fall back into the script. You let them feel the silence. You let them feel the gap between who you used to be and who you've become. Because here's the truth. You can't become unforgettable if you're always predictable. You can't be remembered if you never created contrast. And contrast is created not by force, but by discipline. By walking away when you used to stay. By holding your peace when you used to plead. By moving differently, not to confuse them, but to become clear to yourself. This is the emotional rhythm of Stoicism. You move with calm. You act with clarity. You choose responses that elevate your peace, not their opinion. And when you do this long enough, something beautiful happens. You start to feel free. You start to realize that their validation was never your reward. Your peace was. Your glow was. Your ability to evolve was. So now, ask yourself, are you ready to stop being the predictable one? Are you ready to break the emotional pattern and become the question they can't answer? Because that's where the power lives, not in shouting, but in silence. Not in availability, but in evolution. And that evolution begins with unpredictability. Not as a mask, but as a mirror. One that reflects who you've become when you stop needing to be understood. Let them wonder. Let them spiral. Let them feel the absence of your old patterns. Because when you stop chasing and start becoming, everything they once dismissed becomes everything they can't forget. That's Stoicism. That's psychological power. And that's how you break the emotional loop, for good. 4. Replace their space with purpose, not performance. When someone walks out of your life, they don't just leave a silence, they leave a space. And what you do with that space determines everything. You see, most people rush to fill it. They scramble for distractions, jump into rebounds, post curated images of happiness just to prove they're okay. But let's be honest, is that strength? Or is that survival mode disguised as power? Is that healing? Or is that performance? Because here's the thing, if you replace someone just to be seen, you're still orbiting them emotionally. Your attention still bends around their absence. And in Stoic relationships, attention is everything. The goal isn't to replace them with noise. It's to replace them with purpose, with intention, with the version of you they never got to meet because you were too busy trying to keep their interest. You don't fill the void with people, you fill it with process. You build. You evolve. You shift your focus from their validation to your own foundation. And that's the most intimidating kind of replacement. Not someone new, but someone true. You in your highest form. But this shift requires honesty. Deep, painful honesty. Because it forces you to confront how much of your identity was built around their presence. How many of your thoughts revolved around their approval. How often you bent your energy to fit their level of interest. That version of you doesn't need tweaking, it needs burial. It needs to be laid to rest so something more powerful can emerge. And this isn't a rebirth that happens in front of the world. It happens in the quiet. In the gym when no one's watching. In the pages of the books you start reading again. In the early mornings where you stretch instead of scroll. Think of your life like a house. For far too long, they lived in the center room. Even after they left, you kept that room clean. The lights stayed on. You glanced at the door now and then, just in case they came back. But now, it's time to board that room up. Not with bitterness, but with boundaries. You renovate. You redecorate. You reclaim. That space becomes sacred again. Not to be re-entered by the past, but to be inhabited by peace. And yes, it hurts. Let's not pretend otherwise. That space was once warm. It was familiar. It was full of shared moments, shared laughs, shared futures that never came to pass. But missing someone doesn't mean you go back. It means you're detoxing. You're clearing the emotional residue they left behind. You're making space, not just for someone else, but for a life they no longer get to witness. Because that's the raw truth. They expected you to stay emotionally loyal after they left. They thought they could move on while you stood still. That you'd keep wondering, keep waiting, keep scrolling, keep orbiting. But you didn't. You got quiet. You got focused. You started choosing activities that didn't revolve around proving anything. And slowly, their ghost lost its grip. That's how you become irreplaceable. Not by moving on quickly, but by moving on deeply. When you heal with intention, you stop making it about them. You stop checking who's watching. You stop trying to be seen by the one who made you feel invisible. Because now, you're not waiting to be missed. You're too busy becoming. Becoming grounded. Becoming strong. Becoming a person whose presence no longer depends on external validation. That's not a glow-up. That's a return. A return to who you were before their absence became the center of your world. Here's what they never expected. They assumed their silence would echo longer than your strength. They thought their absence would define your identity. But now you're showing them, without saying a word, that you were always the one who held the power. And nothing crushes the ego more than realizing someone they dismiss no longer makes room for their shadow. You've turned the light on. And in that light, they are no longer relevant. But let's get even more real. This shift isn't about pretending not to care. It's about no longer needing to prove that you don't. That difference is everything. Because many try to fake indifference. They post inspirational quotes. They broadcast their new life. But the energy behind it is still tangled. Still reactive. That's not peace, that's performance. And you can't fake detachment. You either live it or you don't. You either move with clarity, or you move with confusion. You can't heal for show. You heal because your soul demands it. So ask yourself, what fills your space now? Is it grounded in purpose, or is it dressed in performance? Are you evolving for yourself, or still hoping they're watching? Because that's the moment of transformation, the day you stop needing an audience for your growth. You don't post it. You live it. You don't preach it. You embody it. And in doing so, your very existence becomes proof that their departure wasn't your downfall. It was your awakening. Now let's flip the perspective. Imagine they come back, not to stay, but just to check. A random message. A memory they drop into your inbox. Maybe they want to feel your energy again. Maybe they're just curious. But this time, something is different. You're not shaken. You're not excited. You don't feel the rush of hope. Why? Because they're no longer central in your story. Because the version of you they once knew, the emotionally available, endlessly giving, always checking in version, that person no longer exists. They're gone. And who you are now? That's someone they don't know how to approach. They feel the shift. They feel the distance. And they can't bridge it, not because you're being cruel, but because they lost access. And access to your emotional world is no longer free. That's the quiet revenge of evolution. You don't have to show them you're better off. They feel it in the silence. They feel it in your lack of response. In the absence of performance. In the space they used to occupy, now filled with peace. This is the core of Stoicism. It's not about being untouched by emotion. It's about transmuting pain into power. You don't waste your energy on revenge. You invest it in rebuilding. You don't wish they'd suffer. You hope they learn. And in the meantime, you grow in ways they'll never witness. Not because you block them, but because they're no longer relevant to your future. They were a chapter, not the whole book. So take a breath. Let that truth settle. You're not proving anything. You're not competing. You're simply no longer performing for someone who left during the rehearsal. And when you replace their space, not with noise, but with purpose, everything shifts. You're no longer waiting. You're creating. You're no longer chasing. You're becoming. And if this part hits something real inside you, if you've ever had to rebuild silently while someone assumed you were still stuck, then do this for yourself. Like this video, comment, number 1, to claim your growth, and if you haven't already, subscribe, because the next part will show you how to protect your peace with emotional discipline that no one can touch. 5. Guard your emotional accessibility. Emotional accessibility is the invisible key you hand over without realizing. Every text, every comment, every just checking in gives someone access to your internal world. But what happens when they stop valuing it? What happens when they start treating your emotions like a convenience store, open late, always available, no investment required? You begin to feel empty, unnoticed, disposable. And the worst part? You start believing it's your fault. That maybe if you were more interesting, more beautiful, more mysterious, they'd finally value you. But here's the truth. The problem was never your depth. It was their inability to swim. Let's be clear. Your emotions aren't public property. They're sacred. And when you make them accessible to someone who doesn't earn them, you're not being generous. You're being vulnerable in vain. That doesn't mean you should shut down. It means you must become more discerning. Emotional openness is powerful. But power without boundaries becomes chaos. And in Stoic relationships, chaos is the enemy of peace. So how do you guard something invisible? You begin by asking yourself one question: who has earned the right to feel my energy? Not who wants it. Not who benefits from it. Who has earned it? Because we often confuse availability with connection. Just because someone shows up doesn't mean they deserve your softness. Just because they miss you doesn't mean they respect you. There's a difference between curiosity and care. And if you don't define that difference, you'll keep giving energy to people who only show up when they're bored. Here's where most people break down. They think being emotionally available equals being emotionally mature. That being open equals being loving. But Stoicism teaches something else. It's not about how much you feel. It's about what you do with what you feel. That's the mark of discipline, not suppressing emotion, but managing its expression. When you give your emotions away on impulse, you give your power away in pieces. And every piece they take without giving back makes you feel smaller. Eventually, you become emotionally bankrupt. Tired. Drained. Confused. You start asking, why don't they see my worth? But it's not about being seen. It's about being selective. Your emotional presence must be earned, not demanded. And once you realize that, your entire energy changes. You stop over-explaining. You stop reaching out first. You stop reacting to their breadcrumbs. Because you understand now, being accessible to the wrong people is the fastest way to become invisible to yourself. Let's talk about what this looks like. It's not about ghosting. It's not about silence as punishment. It's about stillness as clarity. You don't slam the door. You just close it. Slowly. With finality. You stop offering your energy to situations that drain you. You stop replying to messages that serve no purpose. You stop explaining yourself to people who never listened. That's not arrogance. That's self-respect. That's stoicism. Think about it. The reason they feel confused when you stop engaging isn't because they miss you, it's because they lost access. They were used to emotional control. They knew what to say to trigger you. They knew you'd always answer. And now you don't. That rope they used to pull on, it leads to nowhere. That access they used to exploit, it's gone. And here's the best part, you didn't scream. You didn't block. You didn't post quotes about letting go. You just stopped. That's what shakes them. That's what flips the emotional script. Because people don't value what's always accessible. They value what's rare. What requires effort. What responds with discernment. When they can no longer predict you, they can no longer control you. And that confusion doesn't just touch their ego, it unravels it. Not because they loved you, but because they assumed you'd always be available. This shift, however, is not about making them suffer. It's about ending your own suffering. It's about realizing that you've been keeping a door open for someone who never truly walked in. And once you recognize that, your silence becomes sacred. Your energy becomes selective. Your time becomes priceless. You're no longer reacting to their actions, you're building your own internal world. Quietly. Powerfully. Without apology. Some will say, "But doesn't that make me cold?" No. It makes you calibrated. You've spent enough nights replaying conversations. Enough mornings hoping for a message. Enough moments giving your light to someone who only showed up when their world went dark. This isn't coldness, it's warmth redirected inward. This is what stoicism looks like when applied to your love life. When you no longer make your heart a revolving door, but a fortress with a gate. And only those with clarity, consistency, and care get through. It's also important to acknowledge this, you will be tempted. Old versions of you will rise. You'll want to check in. You'll want to see if they notice your absence. You'll want to send one last message just to feel something. That's natural. But don't act on impulse. Let the feeling pass. Let the wave rise and fall. Because every time you resist that urge, you reinforce the new you. The version of you who doesn't beg to be chosen. The one who doesn't perform for attention. The one who walks away not to punish, but to protect. And over time, this becomes your norm. You don't even think about them. Their name doesn't sting. Their silence doesn't shake you. Why? Because they don't have access. Not to your time. Not to your energy. Not to your peace. You've closed the window they used to peek through. You've covered the door they used to walk through. And now you live in a space they can no longer touch. This is the beauty of guarding emotional accessibility. It's not about building walls. It's about planting gardens. You nurture your spirit. You protect your peace. You invest in people who see your value without being reminded. You create space not for their return, but for your restoration. And when they try to come back, not with love, but with curiosity, they find a version of you they don't recognize. Not because you became someone new, but because you finally became yourself. Let this be your turning point. Your silence isn't passive. It's sacred. Your stillness isn't weakness. It's strategy. Your peace isn't selfish. It's survival. And when you carry that energy into every connection, every conversation, every decision, you stop being the one who waits. You become the one they wait for. Not because you made yourself unreachable, but because you finally understood the value of being emotionally unavailable to the unworthy. That is the power of stoicism in modern relationships. Not emotional suppression, but emotional intelligence. Not manipulation, but mastery. Not ice, but fire, refined and focused. 6. Let the world see you rise without revenge. There's a moment in everyone's journey where the pain fades, the noise quiets, and all that remains is a clear understanding. You never needed to be noticed by them to matter. That moment? It doesn't come with applause. It doesn't come with closure. It arrives in silence, when you no longer care whether they're watching, because you've stopped performing. You've stopped trying to show them what they missed. And instead, you started showing yourself what was always within you. That is the rise, not for revenge, not for validation, but for peace. Too often, people confuse healing with proving something. They try to glow up loudly. They want their ex to see them with someone new, want them to notice the gym gains, the vacation posts, the subtle quotes meant to trigger emotion. But that's not healing. That's reaction. And in Stoic relationships, reacting is weakness. You don't rise to be seen, you rise because you remember who you are. And when you do it quietly, intentionally, with no need to provoke, that's when your absence truly echoes. Let's ask the hard questions. Why do you still want them to notice you? Why do you hope they're still watching? Is it because you still care? Or is it because you haven't yet realized that their validation was never supposed to complete you? Here's the deeper truth. Wanting them to miss you means you're still chained to their attention. You're still measuring your growth by their awareness. And that's not power. That's a performance with no audience. So what does real growth look like? It looks like waking up and not thinking about what they'll see on your story. It looks like choosing peace over performance, choosing depth over display. You get healthier, not to be attractive, but to feel strong. You work harder, not to show off, but because your mission demands it. You glow, not because the world needs to see it, but because you're finally lit from the inside. And eventually, people notice. Not because you tried, but because you stopped trying. You became magnetic. Your peace becomes louder than your past. Your silence starts to feel powerful. And ironically, that's exactly when they start to notice. Maybe it's a like on a photo, a random DM, a vague reaction to your story. They reach out, not because they miss you, but because they feel your shift. They feel your distance. They sense that they no longer hold the space in your mind that they once did. But here's where you stay grounded. You don't respond with excitement. You don't take the bait. You don't reignite a flame that burned you. You stay calm. You stay quiet. Because your peace has become more valuable than their attention. You don't need closure. You don't need a second chance. You've already arrived at something far more powerful, clarity. And that clarity is what makes your presence unforgettable, even in your absence. This is the phase where your glow becomes sacred. It's no longer about them. It's no longer about anyone else. You walk differently because you've remembered your worth. You talk differently because your voice is no longer shaking. You attract differently because your energy isn't scattered anymore. That's not revenge. That's renewal. And yes, they will feel it. Even if they never admit it. Even if they act unfazed. They will notice that you are no longer reachable. Not emotionally. Not mentally. Not spiritually. The version of you they thought they could return to is gone. You didn't upgrade for attention. You upgraded because your soul outgrew the old version of you, the one who begged, the one who chased, the one who hoped. And here's what they never expected. You replaced the craving for their validation with something real. Discipline. Growth. Stillness. You started reading more, sleeping better, talking less. You started spending time with people who poured into you, not just drained you. And in that quiet evolution, you became something terrifying to their ego, unforgettable, untouchable, unbothered. So let this be the truth you hold on to. You don't need revenge to rise. You don't need to show off. You don't need to prove anything. You don't even need to be remembered. What you need is alignment. What you need is to live a life so grounded in peace, so rooted in purpose, that their memory becomes just that, a memory. And when they look at you now, they don't just see change. They feel distance. They feel absence. They feel the weight of a connection they never nurtured. That's stoicism in motion. Emotional detachment not as a tactic, but as a truth. You no longer chase closure because you understand this. The person who couldn't see your value before doesn't get to witness your evolution now. They had access. They lost it. And you? You've risen in silence, rebuilt in private, and returned as someone they'll never truly understand. Not because you became someone else, but because they never saw who you really were to begin with. And if this hit deep, if you felt yourself nodding, feeling the shift inside you, then take a second, like this video and comment, number 1, to lock in this moment of transformation, and make sure to subscribe. Because in the next chapter, we're not just rising. We're disappearing into a version of ourselves so magnetic, so unpredictable, that their memory starts chasing you. So here we are. You've walked through every stage of emotional clarity, 6 powerful, grounded steps that had nothing to do with manipulation, and everything to do with mastery. And what you're feeling now, this deep calm that's beginning to settle in your chest, that's not numbness. That's alignment. That's the moment when your nervous system finally stops bracing for their next message, their next post, their next breadcrumb of attention. It's the moment when your energy returns to its rightful owner, you. Let's take a breath and step back from everything we've uncovered. You've learned to stop trying to be missed. You've allowed your absence to speak louder than your presence. You've become unpredictable, not out of cruelty, but because routine was suffocating your growth. You've filled the void they left not with noise but with purpose. You've locked the door on emotional accessibility without bitterness, and you've risen in a way they never saw coming. Not to be admired, but because staying small for someone who overlooked you was no longer an option. And now, here's the final question I want you to ask yourself: was it ever really about them? Or was it about the part of you that craved recognition from someone who couldn't recognize their own worth? The truth is, most of the people we want to miss us are only capable of noticing what they lost once it's too late. And by then, if you've done the real inner work, you won't even feel the urge to gloat. You'll just feel still, unmoved, free. Because that's what true stoicism delivers, not emotional silence, but emotional sovereignty. It's the kind of strength that allows you to feel deeply without being drowned by those feelings. You're no longer the storm. You're the mountain. And while others may still be running from themselves, trying to replace what they ignored, you've become the presence that needs no validation to echo. You've become the question they can't answer, the energy they can't predict, the peace they never earned. Now, let's talk about what happens next, because this isn't the end. It's the foundation. From here forward, your choices have to align with this clarity. You can't go back to chasing. You can't go back to explaining. You can't shrink again just because someone suddenly notices you now that you're no longer available. That would undo everything. And you didn't come this far just to relapse into the version of you who was built on someone else's attention. Instead, you start moving with deeper intention. You build connections from mutual recognition, not one-sided effort. You share your presence with people who match your clarity, not just your chemistry. You create a life that feels meaningful, whether or not anyone else claps for it. And you continue to evolve, not in reaction to rejection, but in service of your own becoming. You live out the reality that your value is not dictated by how many people miss you. It's anchored in how completely you've reclaimed yourself. And when those old emotions resurface, and they will, you meet them with grace, not guilt. You allow the memory to pass through you like wind through trees. You don't cling, and you don't flinch. Because healing isn't about never feeling, it's about never attaching. You feel it, and you release it. That's emotional intelligence. That's discipline. That's what separates stoic relationships from reactive ones. Let's also get honest about another truth. The world will still try to pull you back into your old ways. Social media. Friends who don't get it. Your own moments of weakness. They'll tempt you to perform. To show them what they missed. To win the breakup. But winning isn't external. It's not about who moved on first, who got hotter, who replaced whom. Winning is waking up one morning and realizing you don't care if they notice. Because you're finally too full to crave the crumbs you used to chase. You don't post for them anymore. You post because your life feels beautiful. You don't go out to be seen, you go out because the world feels alive again. You don't heal to become desirable. You heal because peace is the only currency that ever really mattered. And when they check in, because they will, they'll find someone unshaken. Not angry. Not heartless. Just gone. Gone in the way that matters most, emotionally, energetically, and spiritually unavailable to the chaos they once brought. And that, my friend, is when your silence becomes the loudest message you'll ever send. But let's make this practical too. You've been given tools, not just inspiration. So now the choice is yours. Will you keep feeding the habit of emotional codependency, or will you step fully into your new identity? The one who pauses before reacting. The one who waits before responding. The one who doesn't chase but attracts. That version of you isn't built overnight. It's built in the moments when no one sees you. In the silence. In the waiting. In the practice. And the more you honor that practice, the more the old you dissolves. The one who begged, who pleaded, who needed them to come back just to feel worthy again. That version isn't you anymore. That version served its purpose. It got you here. But now, it's time to bury it with love. Not shame. Not regret. But with deep gratitude. Because without that version, you never know how far you've come. How much weight you've shed. How light your spirit has become. So this is the final shift. You don't just stop chasing them. You stop chasing versions of yourself that were never rooted in truth. You rise not to be unforgettable to them, but to be undeniable to yourself. You become so anchored in peace, so rooted in your worth, that even your presence in a room changes the energy. Not because you're trying to stand out, but because you no longer have anything to prove. You're no longer waiting to be chosen. You've already chosen yourself. That's what makes them miss you. Not your words. Not your pictures. Not your silence alone, but your transformation. Quiet. Consistent. Undeniable. That's what echoes. That's what lingers. And whether they ever say it or not, whether they ever come back or not, it won't matter anymore. Because by the time they realize what they lost, you'll already be too far gone.